Welcome everyone, great to see you. So we know that there are many expert speakers at BET this year talking about AI in education, and we would urge you to follow what they're doing and go to their sessions. We feel that we've got a particular viewpoint, a kind of a unique perspective, and what we really want to talk to you about this afternoon is what we think school leaders, teachers and children actually need to know about AI in education. As Emma said, Peter and I work at the Connected Learning Centre, which is a centre based here in London, supporting schools in all aspects of using technology. We're both ex-teachers, and we're delighted to be joined by our colleague Katarina, as Emma said, who is doing a PhD in AI in education at Linköping University in Sweden. And we first started working with Katarina about 5 years ago. We've worked on a number of EU Erasmus projects together with schools. And one of these projects is called Empower2Learn, and it's looking at personalisation in education using technology. And that got us into the field of thinking about AI and was actually the thing that motivated Katarina to begin her PhD. But what we really want to talk to you about is why it's important for school leaders to understand about the opportunities of AI, the promises of AI, but also the concerns about AI in education. So this survey is from Ipsos and the World Bank, and it was asking people about how they think AI is going to change their lives. And we thought it was really interesting that actually the top thing that came out in this study is that people think that it's in education that AI is going to most change their lives. So there's this, as I said, this real kind of promise of AI changing things in schooling and in learning. But do we really know that yet? It's still an early technology. We know that there are companies like Squirrel in China working at scale. But in the school sector, do we really have enough research and information yet to know whether this young technology is actually making a difference at the school level? And we do feel that there is a kind of scarcity of research at the moment. Some of you may have listened to the Reith lectures, the BBC Reith lectures in December, and heard Stuart Russell, Professor of Computer Science and founder of the Centre for Human Compatible Artificial Intelligence at the University of California, Berkeley. And he said that we're in the Wild West and there isn't a sheriff in sight in terms of AI in general. So we know that in terms of AI in education, there are governments and NGOs, different organisations, trying to catch up in terms of regulation or perhaps more often guidance. So, for example, here in the UK, the Information Commissioner's Office has brought out guidance around kind of age-appropriate use and design for children in all kinds of different apps and platforms. So there's now a code which developers, designers have to follow. But we think that there is a kind of a lag, really, and a lack of teeth in terms of actual regulation in the school sector in terms of AI in education and machine learning. And Wayne Holmes, esteemed researcher, there's a quote from him here saying that, even now in 2022, the research community really are signalling that there is not a sufficient ethical framework yet for the application of AI in education. It hasn't been agreed and established yet. But a good place to start, I think, is the Institute for Ethical AI in Education. They've been working for the past 2.5 years, looking across at the landscape and really trying to provide some guidance in a balanced way for both companies, developers, and the education sector, universities and school sector, around kind of what to be aware of and what to look out for. So things like vulnerabilities around intimate data and algorithmic bias and learners' agency, sort of really important things to be considering. This is from UNICEF, UNICEF's Global Forum from last year, and we agree very much with this, that kind of actually the perspective of the child is really important. The child, the young person, is very important when we're talking about AI in education. So often the kind of concerns of children under 18 are missing from discussions around AI and learning, and kind of what do young people know about kind of giving their informed consent about their use of data. This is from UNESCO, also some useful guidance around ethics. But sometimes even well-intentioned advice and guidance kind of around ethics in AI maybe falls into the trap of kind of saying how much there is this kind of promise that we don't really know whether it is real or not. So there is this hype. But I mean, look at this cover from this report, that there are kind of these huge expectations, and yeah, we haven't actually got that evidence yet.
So Sarah has mentioned our Erasmus project. Its actual theme is about personalised learning and teaching and empowering students through the use of technology in general. But this has brought us into the area of AI because one of the features of AI in education that's often spoken about is the ability to personalise learning for an individual student. And of course, there are many ways to personalise learning and empower students through technology, including a multitude of conventional apps and platforms, and looking at those has been part of our project. And although the pandemic wasn't on our radar at the start of the project, across the partners in the project, we've been able to draw on the daily contact with teachers over this period of remote and hybrid and face-to-face learning that we've had over the past 2 years. So alongside this, we wanted to explore within the project the much vaunted potential that Sarah's been talking about of AI in a little more depth. And at the start of our project, some of you will be familiar with this, it's the EU DigComp Edu, or the Digital Competence Framework for Educators. And we've just highlighted a couple of the strands there that certainly are really pertinent when thinking about teachers' CPD, teacher competencies, and understanding what AI and other apps and platforms can bring. And interestingly, just back last month, the overall EU competency framework for all citizens, and teachers and leaders are a subset of that, of course, for all citizens, digital competencies has been updated to include, amongst many other things, quite a few points with regard to citizens interacting with AI systems, and you can see there some of the relevant topics. So I guess in due course the framework for educators will also be updated. And now we're going to have a very quick look at some examples of tools that can personalise and empower learners, in the words of our project. And out of many possible examples, we've just had to select a few for this presentation, and we're not mentioning them as recommendations or endorsements, but just to highlight some what we think are really interesting and relevant points to make. So as you can see, Bluetick is a UK platform for secondary maths, and so what's notable about Bluetick? Well, first and foremost, I think teachers who are expert maths teachers, current teachers, have been involved all along, and they indeed feature in the videos that accompany the exercises within this platform. Secondly, the website, can you go back? Thank you. Secondly, the website is upfront about the tool, and there is an FAQ section explaining what the role of the AI is, and actually it's in 3 aspects. Because sometimes when we see the label AI and we try to inquire a little bit further about, well, where is that working, it's quite hard to get even top-level information. So there's also within the platform and the app overarching positivity and encouragement for students at its basis. And then just as a small example of personalization, students are able to select which of the AI avatars they prefer to be giving them the immediate feedback that they receive as they work through the exercises. Okay, on to the next one. And then I think Caligo has been a BET Awards winner this year, so congratulations to them. And this app is available in UK and France. And the reason why we've chosen it is that it's quite unusual in being focused not on content or techniques for solving mathematical problems or language learning, but actually on the development of skills and with an audience of much younger learners in mind, and of course their teachers. And 3 key points to make about this. Number 1, in this specialist kind of niche area, the creators, the developers have taken note that children are taught handwriting to a number of different models or schemes, so any primary educators in the room will be aware of, it's quite a complex landscape. Number 2, it can be used in the classroom or away from the classroom, and that's true, of course, of many educational platforms and tools. And then number 3, students receive instant feedback as they're doing the letter formation, which allows them to self-correct on the fly as they do their handwriting. And if you think, is that achievable in a conventional handwriting lesson with 30 children? Well, certainly this app brings something we would like to think. Okay, now, this afternoon, I was actually able to visit the Lexplore stand here for the first time. So this is 2 examples of software with the aim of developing all students' reading ability. And the one on the left, Lexplore, uses eye tracking and machine learning AI to assess students. And I myself was sat down and was assessed. The 2 tests take about 2 to 5 minutes per student. Student reads 2 passages, 1 aloud and 1 silently. And meanwhile, the eye tracking device analyzes what the students or me myself are doing. And then some comprehension questions follow that. And it was launched first in Sweden, but it's now available in a number of countries, including the UK. And the fact that we've got 2 examples side by side, I think, illustrate the dilemma that schools and leaders and teachers face in making choices. Often there are very similar products, ostensibly doing a very similar job. One is free, one is not. One uses AI, but the other one doesn't. So what? Legilexi is a Swedish assessment and instruction program, and it's free of charge for school. It's been explicitly designed together with researchers in conjunction with schools, and again, it's about mapping student abilities so as to provide teaching recommendations. So both of the platforms offer a follow-up of interventions. Both offer learning analytics on an individual, group, or school level, or higher level across a group of schools. And local authorities can get aggregated scores, potentially to inform CPD. So yeah, how do we know which platform is which? But as we say, we're not here to make recommendations to you. And then moving on to our next example, so Binogi, another Swedish product. It's been developed by a research community together with teachers. So that's a nice model, we think. Teachers involved from the start, and it can be licensed by municipalities or local authorities or schools. They can join it, and the tool actually emerges from a need, and it's the need to support teaching in classrooms with many newly arrived migrants or students that speak very little or no Swedish at all. And it features, you can probably gather from that screenshot, it features a whole multitude of short animated videos and lessons which cover 13 curriculum subjects, including maths and sciences, Swedish, English, history, geography, and others. And complicated key concepts and subject-specific vocabulary are explained in playful and simple ways. And the audio, the sound, is available, and this is where the personalization comes in, and subtitles too, in 7 languages currently: Swedish, Finnish, English, Arabic, Somali, Dari, Tigrinya, and more languages are due shortly. And personalization also happens through quizzes at different levels. And again, teachers have access to a learning analytics dashboard and can monitor their students as well as undertake formative assessment. And I guess a question from us that we're going to leave hanging is actually, how much data do you need? Do you need all the data that learning analytics can provide, or is it just simply too much data? So now I'm going to hand over to Katarina.
So as Sarah mentioned in the beginning, so our project on personalized learning really pulled me into this area, AI of education. So I've been conducting, I'm a PhD student for 1.5 years. I've been conducting some ethnographical research within this area. What I just wanted to show you with this picture is that AI is already, as you know, something that many of our children already interact with on a daily basis. They get recommended songs, films, they interact with their friends, and they are very used to these interfaces. So these technologies and these interfaces are now integrated in some of the systems that we have shown here, but also in other systems that have not AI in them. So important to realize about AI is that it depends on 2 different, let's say a combination of 2 different technologies or approaches. A very recent meta-study, 2020, based on 400 research articles published between 2000 and 2019, actually indicate that the most trends in AI in education relate to the use of machine learning coupled with student profiling models and learning analytics that support personalized learning. And I think many of you know that ML is a part of AI, a subcategory of AI that uses mathematical computer models to help a computer to learn or to predict without being programmed or without direct instructions. So for machine learning to be efficient, you need a lot of data. And to understand the data, learning analytics or advanced analytics is also needed. So it's also an increasingly important research area of AI in education. It focuses on a variety of issues, from predicting student success to identifying students at risk of failing or dropping out. It can, of course, personalize the learning and give timely feedback to students. So it's a sophisticated way of visualizing analytical data. but we still have quite little empirical evidence of what happens when these technologies are introduced in classrooms. And by empirical data, I mean by educational researchers going into the classrooms, observing what happens in the classrooms, interviewing teachers during a longer period of time. We have, of course, conducted efficiency studies. But what I wanted to do was to really look more in depth what happens to students, and particularly what happens to the teachers when they use these kind of algorithmical decision-making tools in their teaching. So in this slide, I will just present you a very short quote from a field note I did, and it was a year 5, so the students were 11, primary education students between 11 and 12 years old. And this was done, my fieldwork was done within a project on AI in mathematics education. So we were interested to see if students would improve in the learning with the teaching aid technology that we were using. And what I could observe in this classroom was that students weren't very happy with the personalization. One of the students said, first I get super easy, then I get super difficult, then I get super easy again. And the teacher stopping by asked me, so why is this technology not really delivering the right question for this student? And I couldn't answer that, because also to me, I wasn't really clear about exactly what made the algorithms personalized in certain ways. So the students were a bit motivated, but there were also examples of students being frustrated. And this is from an interview with a teacher.
There were some programming errors when the students discovered them, and the many discussions we had to have about that when you're in a project like this, you can develop software, then things can go wrong.
Yeah, so this is a very enthusiastic teacher being in this project, and we can see here that the students saw some errors which were actually inflicted by the teaching aid author. It was an error that then replicated itself, so it came back over and over again. So we have an example in this quote actually of an algorithmic bias. So teachers tried to make this intervention to work. In fact, this teacher, she took all the exercises and put it in a different software so that the students could still exercise, and she wasn't really aware of that the intervention that we were doing would be a bit flawed by her ambition. But in the end, the teaching aid author also had to replace the entire module with these exercises, because it wasn't enough just to change or correct the number. It had already gotten into the system. So to conclude, so although the circumstances were very specific, these systems are quite poorly understood for teachers. They are poorly understood for some of us that try to research it, and also for some of the companies that use systems as a third-party developers.
So what do you need to know as school leaders? So we've just pulled together some recommendations really that we think you need to think about.
So firstly, as a leader or a teacher, you can use these 9 UNICEF points of guidance which draw on the rights of the child as a kind of touchstone for child-centered AI. And do you know whether your local solutions achieve the following. I'm not going to read every single one out, but how do you know? So things like inclusion of and inclusion for all children, prioritising fairness and non-discrimination, protecting children's data and privacy, incredible amount of children's data. Sarah, you mentioned before, how do children, and we're talking about children under 18, how do they give informed consent? Safety, obviously, transparency. And what we'd recommend is that you empower your whole community, your class, your institution, with some knowledge of AI and children's rights, and prepare children too.
So we really do need to support children's AI literacy and their kind of critical literacy. They need to understand how it works, how it impacts society, and how to use it ethically. I've got a few slides here from Linda Lucas, Beck's favourite Finnish computer scientist and illustrator, from her Hello Ruby series, books and YouTube, which I think is a great place to start for even very young children. And again, as Katarina mentioned, thinking about the kind of services that children, young people are already using, and where is the AI within those services. And very young children, in terms of their computing curriculum, computer science, can actually begin to understand how machine learning works.
Okay, and some of you may be familiar with this graphic, which comes from the DFE's EdTech strategy from a few years ago now. But it's all about not starting with the app or the platform, but starting with your vision, I should say, and your needs, your learning needs. Start with the teaching and learning. Plan for whole school integration and plan for teacher skills. Alternatively, there could be an admin need or an assessment need or a CPD requirement. But first and foremost, what is it that you want to do? Define that, not starting with the product. And consider any barriers to implementation. And watch out for issues arising as you do begin to implement. It's a whole process that you're undertaking.
Yes, and you are the most important part of these technologies to be successful. So do engage with research, with development projects, and be the one asking the critical questions or the ethically difficult questions, because they need to be asked, and also evaluate the research evidence that claims efficacy. How was it actually conducted, by whom, and so on, so that you know that the research is independent.
And be clear about effective teaching. Know what the AI can do and what the AI can't do. Don't assume that it does it better than a teacher. Usually it doesn't. And as Rose Luckin says, teachers, educational practitioners need to be even more critical. They need to have even more metacognitive skills themselves to make judgments, and also to interact with some of these tools and platforms as well. So to summarise, we think that you need to really understand children's rights. We think you need to help children and teachers as well to have a real critical understanding. Define your vision and your learning needs. Be really clear about effective teaching, and above all, collaborate with companies and influence, as Katarina said.